Alright guys, new lesson Friday. Continue with logic. We're moving on from the truth tables and the compound statements to what's called conditional statements, okay? Statements that rely on conditions. If this, then this happens. So whenever we speak about conditional statements, we're talking about if and then. The symbolic form is usually the arrow. It's usually between the P and the Q. Well, in this case, I made a flub there. That should be a Q. Now, what I need you to understand, whenever we use these if-then conditional statements, they're going to have a hypothesis and they're going to have a conclusion. The hypothesis always follows the word if, and it goes all the way till the word then. The conclusion will always follow the word then. Kind of put that on here. So if you go into number one, what I did here was, here is a conditional statement. If you live in Nashville, then you live in Tennessee. Hypothesis, everything after if, you live in Nashville. Your conclusion is everything after then, you live in Tennessee. So here we have number two. If the sum of the measures of two angles is 90 degrees, then they are complementary angles. Hypothesis, so I look for the word if. That means everything after that. So I'm going to put, not even know if I'm going to be able to fit everything. The sum of some of the measures, and I'll just continue on here, of two angles is 90 degrees. I write too big. The conclusion always follows then, so I will write the conclusion. They are complementary. Angles. Again, number three, hypothesis comes after if. Conclusion comes after then. So the hypothesis for number three a quadrilateral, that's a four-sided figure, is a square. The conclusion, it has four right angles. Now in the bottom section here, we're going to practice writing our own conditional statements, which means we're going to have to add if, and we're going to have to add then. An obtuse angle has a measure of an obtuse angle has a measure greater than 90 degrees. So if I wanted to say, put it in if then, we could say if the angle is greater than 90 degrees, then it is obtuse. Let's go to like number 7. Valentine's Day is in February. If it is Valentine's Day, then it is February. Simple enough. Okay, so this is where it gets fun. We're still going to use if and then, but now we're going to switch things around. We have to, again, pay attention to the hypothesis and the conclusion, because that's what we're going to end up switching around, flipping or doing their opposites. We've already talked about negating in the previous lesson. In other words, the opposite. We already know the symbols are those wavy lines. Okay? So when I ask you, I need the inverse of the conditional statement, then what we're going to do is exactly what you see here in these symbols. We're going to do the opposite of whatever the hypothesis is, and then we're going to do the opposite of whatever the conclusion is. Opposite of both. When I ask for the converse of the conditional statement, then all we do is we switch. The hypothesis becomes the conclusion, and the conclusion becomes the hypothesis. When we do the contrapositive, then we do the opposite, and then we switch them. These come with truth values. Okay? So let's see what we can do with this if-then statement. If it is Saturday, then there is no school. Okay. If I want the inverse, well, the inverse means I'm going to say no to both. Both are going to be contradictory. If it is not Saturday, and I'm going to shorten it, then there is school. So, what do we say here? What's the truth to this? So notice what I did was I went in here. Here's the hypothesis. Here's the conclusion. For inverse, inverse means I am going to do the opposite of both. So I did the opposite. If it isn't Saturday, then there is no school. Well, if it isn't Saturday, then there is school. I did the opposite of both. What's the truth value of this? Well, guess what? The truth value of this is false. Because Saturday is not the only day we don't have school. Sunday. Converse. What's the converse of this? Well, converse means we're only going to switch those guys. We're going to flip them over. So if we don't do anything, we don't change anything, we just switch them. So we're going to go if there is no school, then it is Saturday. What is the truth value to this? Again, this would also have to be false. Sunday is another day. Contrapositive. What are we doing with contrapositive? Well, contrapositive says, first we say no to both, we flip them. In other words, we negate or we do the opposite of both, and then we switch them around. So if there is school, then it is not Saturday. This one is true. And we will continue doing this part right here in the in our lesson tomorrow. Alright, so if things weren't complicated enough, we jump into what's called biconditional statements. That means we're going to use the conjunction of a conditional and its converse. By conjunction, that means we're going to use and. Okay? When we designate a biconditional statement, we use a double-sided arrow. And it's read as if and only if. There is no then. This little piece, if and only if, is in the center. It separates both of them. So if you look at number 1 here, two angles are supplementary if and only if the sum of their measures is 180 degrees. So biconditional statements are true when both the conditional and the converse are true. Remember, we're joining them with the word and. That means both statements have to be true. So what is the conditional to this? Well, the conditional to this one is the beginning. If two angles are supplementary, then the sums of their measures is 180. then the sum of their measures is 180. The converse of this so remember what converse is. Converse, you're just switching the hypothesis and the conclusion. So here you have hypothesis and this is the conclusion. So we're just going to switch them around and just say it all over again. So we start off with if the sum of two angles is 180, then they are supplementary. Both are true, so the truth value of this is true. So I'm going to go over this in more detail on Friday. You just have to pay attention to the cues. And on this last page of your notes, if you print it out, I gave you kind of like a graphic organizer for one, what we've studied already. What is a conjunction? What is a disjunction? Here's an example. So you just have to remember for a conjunction, both have to be true. That's for the conjunction. For disjunction, which means we're using the word or, either statement has to be true. And if you go further down, here you have an example of the biconditional statements, or the conditional statements, using these for example. Here is the conditional, which is just straightforward. If this, then that. So if it is St. Patrick's Day, then it is March. Truth value. Inverse, again, what inverse is we say the opposite of both. So if it isn't St. Patrick's Day, then it is not March. And that is false because it can be any other day. It could be a spring break, you know. Converse, what happens is you're going to grab the hypothesis and the conclusion and you're just going to switch them. Contrapositive, you do the opposites and then you switch them. And then lastly, you have your biconditional. If you really want me to just give you a shortcut, how do you create a biconditional? You simply add if and only if in between them. But you've already checked the converse and the conditional, because you're using and, both have to be true, and in this case it's false. You may be confused after this, so I understand that. I'll try to be a little bit more explicit when it comes into our lesson so that you can please have questions ready for me. See you tomorrow.